The preliminary results of an independent autopsy report in the death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells have been released. The cause and manner of death have been ruled undetermined, but civil rights attorney Ben Crump says foul play cannot be ruled out. Crump announced the findings during a press conference this morning where Nolan Wells' parents also pleaded for more transparency.
Why did you have to keep Nolan Wells' neck? I thought according to y'all, he drowned. If he drowned, if there was no foul play, why are you keeping his throat? Oh, and I also have a second question. What's the redness behind his head? When you drowned, you don't have red discoloration behind your neck, around the skull area.
I don't believe he drowned. I believe he was killed. But I'm a judge that has to weigh all the evidence. Preliminarily, that's what I see. You don't leave your friend on an island, seeing that he has left his phone and not at least go back. You came there with him. You left him there, you say, because he wanted to stay. But you notice that he's left his phone. How was he going to get home in the first place?
A father should never have to say his son should be at football practice instead of in a grave. But that's exactly what Elmore Wansley said weeks after his 18-year-old son, Nolan Wells, vanished off a remote island on the 4th of July. Nolan was supposed to come home that night. He was young, athletic, a strong swimmer, a college football player with his whole life ahead of him. Instead, his body was found 2 days later, floating face down near the shoreline of Horn Island, Mississippi. The official story was simple. He drowned, no foul play suspected, case closed, but his family never believed it. They flew his body 1,000 miles away to a doctor with no ties to Mississippi law enforcement because they said the story just wasn't adding up. What they found, or rather what they couldn't find, has left investigators, forensic experts, and an entire country asking the same question. What really happened to Nolan Wells? This isn't a story with a tidy ending. There's no dramatic arrest, no courtroom verdict, no confession. What there is a grieving family fighting for answers, a community demanding transparency, and a case file full of question marks. Stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why so many people believe this case is far from over. If this story moves you, hit subscribe now, because we cover real, verified true crime cases every week, and you won't want to miss what comes next in this one. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old. Friends and family describe him the way people describe someone who lit up every room he walked into. Beloved, hardworking, full of promise. He was a football player, the kind of athlete coaches build a program around. Those close to him say he trained relentlessly, chasing a future in the sport he loved. His father put it simply, Nolan wanted to make his parents proud. He put in the work because he wanted to be the best. He wasn't just an athlete, though. People who knew him describe a kid who was well-liked, easygoing, the type of teenager who had genuine friendships, not just acquaintances. That detail matters because it's part of what makes this case so hard for his family to accept. The people who were with him on Horn Island weren't strangers. They were people he trusted. Nolan's mother, Christine Wansley, has spoken publicly about the toll his death has taken on her. She's described her own grief in raw, unfiltered terms. The kind of pain that doesn't fade with time, only changes shape. She and Elmore have leaned on their faith and on each other to get through what should have been a summer of celebration and became, instead, the beginning of a nightmare. By all accounts, July 4th, 2026 was supposed to be an ordinary holiday, a boat trip with friends, sunshine. An undeveloped barrier island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast, the kind of place local teenagers go to escape into a day of freedom. Nolan Wells never came home from that trip, and nothing about his family's summer has been ordinary since. Let's walk through what we actually know. On the morning of July 4th, 2026, Nolan set out by boat with a group of high school friends, headed for Horn Island, a narrow, undeveloped strip of sand and scrub brush about 10 miles off the Mississippi coast. It's only reachable by private boat. No roads, no cell towers close enough to guarantee a signal. Just sand, water, and whoever you brought with you. According to Nolan's family's legal team, he was last seen on the island at around 3 in the afternoon. What happened in the hours after that is where the story starts to splinter. By evening, Nolan wasn't with the group anymore. At some point that night, one of the friends who'd gone boating with him contacted the Coast Guard around 11 p.m., reporting him missing. Separately, and almost at the same time, Nolan's mother contacted the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. It was just before midnight. Think about that timeline for a second. A group of friends spends the day together on an isolated island. Somewhere along the way, one of them disappears, and it takes until nearly midnight, many hours later, for anyone to alert the authorities. A search began that night and continued into the following days. Law enforcement, the Coast Guard, and volunteer search and rescue teams, including the United Cajun Navy, combed the waters and shoreline around Horn Island. 2 days later, on July 6th, a U.S. Park ranger found Nolan's body. He was in the water along the island's northwestern shoreline. The Jackson County coroner told reporters there were no immediate, obvious signs of physical injury. Authorities said early on that they believed Nolan had drowned and did not suspect foul play, though the sheriff's office was careful to add that the investigation was still active and that anyone with photos or information from that day should come forward. For most families, that might have been the end of it. A tragic accident, a young man, a strong current, a terrible loss. For Nolan's family, it was only the beginning of their fight for answers. This is where the case stops being simple. Nolan's family retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump, a name many of you will recognize from other high-profile cases involving questions of justice and transparency. And Crump didn't mince words. "It is not adding up," he told reporters. That single sentence became the rallying cry for everything that followed. Why didn't it add up? A few reasons. First, the family pointed to Nolan himself. They described him as an excellent swimmer, athletic, strong, not the profile, in their eyes, of someone who simply slips beneath the water on a calm day at the beach. Of course, experienced rescue professionals will tell you that drowning doesn't discriminate based on athletic ability. Strong swimmers drown every year, caught by currents, exhaustion, or circumstances no one could predict. But for a grieving family looking for something that makes sense, that detail weighed heavily. Second, there was the account of what happened on the boats that day. Crump has said that investigators kept telling the family they saw no evidence of foul play, even though some of the teenagers on the trip had recorded video of what he described as an altercation happening on the boats. That's a serious claim. It doesn't mean a crime occurred. It doesn't identify who was involved or what the argument was about. But it does raise a legitimate question. If there was tension or conflict earlier that day, shouldn't that be part of a thorough investigation? Third, there was the sheriff's own choice of words. Early statements from law enforcement said no foul play was suspected. To a grieving, suspicious family, that phrase sounded like a door being closed. Law enforcement experts who later reviewed the case pushed back on that read, suggesting the more accurate statement should have been that there were no immediate obvious signs of foul play, a much more open-ended, less conclusive statement. Words matter, especially to a family desperate for their son's death to be taken seriously, so the family made a decision. They didn't wait for the state's process to run its course. They had Nolan's body flown from Mississippi all the way to Washington, D.C., specifically so a forensic pathologist with zero ties to Mississippi law enforcement could conduct an independent examination. That's an enormous, painful, expensive step for a family to take. It tells you how strongly they believed something wasn't being fully investigated. The man they chose was Dr. Roger Mitchell Jr., a respected forensic pathologist. And what his independent autopsy found, and more importantly, what it couldn't determine, only added more layers to the mystery. Quick reminder before we go further. If you want more real, verified cases like this one, make sure you're subscribed and drop a comment letting me know where you think this investigation is headed. Here's where most true crime stories give you a breakthrough. A smoking gun, a piece of evidence that changes everything. This case didn't give anyone that. And in a strange way, that's exactly what makes it so unsettling. The state of Mississippi had already performed its own official autopsy on July 7th, one day after Nolan's body was recovered. But weeks later, Dr. Mitchell's independently commissioned autopsy results came back, and the conclusion was almost as frustrating as no conclusion at all. Manner of death, undetermined, pending further investigation. Cause of death, undetermined. Not accidental drowning, case closed. Not homicide, undetermined. Word that, for a family desperate for closure, must feel like a door slamming shut and creaking back open at the same time. So why couldn't a trained forensic pathologist give a definitive answer? Dr. Mitchell laid out the limitations in his report, and they're worth understanding because they explain everything about why this case remains open. He said he was unable to directly observe Nolan's airway and lungs for water, a critical piece of evidence in confirming an actual drowning. He also couldn't directly examine the stomach for gastric contents. On top of that, the toxicology results, which test for drugs, alcohol, or other substances in the body, hadn't come back yet at the time of his report. And there was something else. Dr. Mitchell didn't have access to all of Nolan's remains. Part of the interior of his neck had already been retained by the State Medical Examiner's Office. Now, to be fair, retaining certain tissue after an autopsy is described as common, standard forensic practice. It's not automatically suspicious, but for a family already distrustful of the process, it was one more variable outside their control. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office responded publicly, defending its own work. They said their autopsy was performed according to standard procedures and protocols followed for every case, and they declined to comment on the independent findings. They also urged the public, pointedly, to remain patient and avoid drawing conclusions before the investigation is complete, warning that speculation only creates obstacles. That's a fair point. And it's worth sitting with for a moment, because this case has also become something bigger than one family's grief. Photos from the trip showed Nolan, who is black, surrounded mostly by white friends, with at least one other black friend also present. Given Mississippi's difficult racial history, that detail alone has fueled intense national speculation about whether race played a role, either in what happened on that island or in how seriously the investigation was initially handled. The NAACP's national president publicly called for a complete, thorough investigation before anyone rushes to conclusions in either direction. So here's where the case stands. No confirmed cause of death, no confirmed manner of death. A family that doesn't believe the drowning explanation adds up. An independent pathologist who couldn't rule out other possibilities, but also couldn't confirm them. And a community holding its breath, waiting for toxicology results and a final official answer. So where does this leave us today? The investigation into Nolan Wells's death remains officially open. Jackson County authorities have not ruled his death a homicide. They also haven't closed the case as a simple accidental drowning. It sits in that uncomfortable, unresolved space that so many families know all too well. Waiting. Nolan's parents and their legal team met with the Jackson County District Attorney to push for more transparency. According to reporting, they didn't walk away with major new information, but they did secure one meaningful step forward, an agreement to have Nolan's cell phone examined jointly by forensic experts representing both the family and the investigators. That detail matters. A phone can hold text messages, location data, photos, videos, potentially some of the clearest evidence of what really happened on Horn Island that day. Everyone is still waiting on the final toxicology results. Everyone is still waiting on a completed, comprehensive investigative report. And Ben Crump has made it clear the family isn't going anywhere until they get one. Christine Wansley has spoken about how this ordeal has affected her, describing her own state of mind in the aftermath as overwhelming, as though her thoughts and emotions are constantly in flux. It's the kind of grief that doesn't get easier just because the news cameras eventually move on to the next story. Elmore Wansley has said his son should be getting ready for football season right now, not being remembered in headlines. This case has sparked something bigger than local news coverage. It's ignited a national conversation about how quickly authorities label a death as accidental, how thoroughly investigations are conducted when there are no obvious signs of foul play, and how families, especially black families, are treated when they push back against an official narrative. To be clear, nothing in the record confirms a crime happened on Horn Island. The independent autopsy did not conclude murder. It did not identify a suspect. It did not prove foul play. What it did was something almost more haunting. It left the door open. It said, in careful medical language, that there are still real, unanswered questions about how an 18-year-old ended up dead in the water on a holiday afternoon. And until toxicology results come back, until investigators release a final report, until Nolan's family gets the transparency they've been asking for since July, that door is going to stay open.
Reviewing some of the notes that Attorney Crump put forth during this press conference, as you pointed out there, Vlad, the cause of Wells's death still undetermined pending an investigation, and that is sort of the crux of where we have been with this case from the very beginning, as not only the family of Nolan Wells, but those in the community have all called for transparency in this case and more clarity from the lead investigative agency, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office.
If you want to help keep attention on this case, the most powerful thing you can do is simple. Talk about it, share verified information, follow credible outlets for updates, and most importantly, resist the urge to name or accuse anyone based on speculation. Nolan's family deserves a real investigation, not a social media trial. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He was a son, a friend, an athlete who worked relentlessly for a future that was taken from him far too soon. Whatever the final answer turns out to be, he deserves the truth, and his family deserves peace. Rest easy, Nolan. Your story isn't over. And it won't be until the people who love you get the answers they've been fighting for. Before you go, I want to hear from you. What do you think really happened on Horn Island that day? Do you believe the investigation has been thorough enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you believe this family deserves answers, share this video so more people are paying attention. Subscribe for more real, fact-checked cases, and I'll see you in the next one.